The Zone of Death is a 50 square mile area in Yellowstone National Park where an interesting jurisdictional loophole theoretically could allow someone to evade prosecution for federal crimes, including murder. The loophole stems from two fundamental constitutional points. The Sixth Amendment's vicinage clause mandates that criminal defendants have, quote, the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law. This requirement reflects the principle that juries should be drawn from the same community as the crime because they better understand its impact and can serve as a check on overzealous prosecutors. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution further reinforces this by requiring that the trial of all crimes except in cases of impeachment shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed. Together, these provisions create a dual requirement. Federal criminal defendants must be tried both in the state where the crime occurred and before a jury drawn from that state's federal judicial district. The problem originated from historical circumstances surrounding Yellowstone's establishment. When Congress created the national park in 1872, it encompassed land primarily in the Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho territories. At the time, none of these were states, so the jurisdictional arrangement seemed straightforward. However, when those three achieved statehood in 1890, 1889, and 1890 respectively, Congress made a critical decision that would create the constitutional loophole. Rather than dividing Yellowstone's jurisdiction among the three new states' federal districts, Congress assigned the entire park to the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming. This made Wyoming's federal district unique, the only one in the nation to encompass territory in multiple states. The park is geographically distributed as such: 96% within Wyoming, 3% in Montana, and 1% in Idaho. The federal government maintains exclusive jurisdiction over the entire park, meaning state courts cannot prosecute crimes committed within park boundaries. The anomaly remained unnoticed until 2005, when Michigan State University law professor Brian C. Kalt stumbled upon it while researching Sixth Amendment technicalities. Brian was initially investigating how some states allowed trials in neighboring counties depending on proximity to jurisdictional boundaries, a small but potentially significant prosecutorial advantage. He kept encountering references to the District of Wyoming as the sole exception to the general rule that federal judicial districts follow state boundaries. Legal scholars consistently dismissed this as insignificant, but Brian's curiosity was piqued. With limited time to complete his research before his wife gave birth, he decided to investigate this seemingly minor topic. His investigation revealed the constitutional problem. For crimes committed in the Idaho portion of Yellowstone, the Sixth Amendment would require a jury drawn from people who live both in the state of Idaho and the federal district of Wyoming. The only area meeting both criteria is the Idaho portion of Yellowstone itself, which has a population of exactly 0. Brian published his findings in the Georgetown Law Journal under the title "The Perfect Crime." However, his motivation was not to encourage criminal activity, but to highlight a constitutional defect and prompt congressional action. As Brian explicitly stated, the point of publicizing the legal blind spot should not be to encourage people to commit crimes, but rather to get Congress to eliminate the risk by closing the loophole. He feared that publicizing the theory might inspire someone to commit a crime in the zone before Congress could act. He attempted to alert federal officials before publication, writing to more than 24 senators and congressmen, but was almost entirely ignored. Only after publication did the theory gain widespread attention through media coverage and fictional adaptations. The only court case to address the zone of death theory involved Michael David Bell Durain, a Montana man who illegally shot an elk in December 2005. Importantly, Michael was standing in the Montana portion of Yellowstone, not the unpopulated Idaho zone, when he fired the shot that killed an elk just outside park boundaries. He then dragged the elk's head through the park to his vehicle. When prosecuted in federal court, Michael's defense team cited Brian's perfect crime theory, arguing that he should be tried by a jury from the Montana portion of the park. While the Montana section does have some residents, there are too few to form a proper jury pool, presenting a similar but less severe constitutional problem than the Idaho zone. The trial judge's response was dismissive and legally unsatisfying. Rather than engaging with the constitutional arguments, the judge simply stated to adopt a different position would create a virtual no man's land. Since there is no case law that states otherwise, this court must dismiss defendant's objection to a Wyoming jury panel. This analysis provided no alternative interpretation of the vicinage requirement and no explanation of why the Sixth Amendment wouldn't apply. The judge's reasoning essentially amounted to, I can't just let him go, not a legal argument but a policy preference. The issue gained renewed attention in 2022 when Idaho State Representative Colin Nash, a Democrat from Boise, sponsored House Joint Memorial 3. This legislation formally asked Congress to close the loophole by transferring the Idaho portion of Yellowstone to the jurisdiction of the U.S. District Court for the District of Idaho. Nash cited recent high-profile disappearances in the area as motivation for action. He specifically mentioned the Lori Daybell case, where authorities obtained evidence that the missing children had entered Yellowstone, and the Gabby Petito case, which occurred in nearby Grand Teton National Park. The Idaho House Judiciary and Rules Committee approved Nash's memorial with a due pass recommendation, and it was forwarded to federal congressional leadership. However, Nash acknowledged uncertainty about whether Congress would act. The fix for the zone of death loophole would be straightforward. Congress could pass legislation redrawing federal judicial district boundaries to align with state lines, ensuring that Idaho's portion of Yellowstone falls under the District of Idaho's jurisdiction. Bryan has drafted the necessary legislation, which he describes as 4 lines long. However, any such fix could not be applied retroactively due to the Sixth Amendment's requirement that the judicial district shall have been previously ascertained by law. Retroactive application might also violate the Constitution's prohibitions against ex post facto laws and bills of attainder. Nagoro is located in the mountainous Iya Valley of Tokushima Prefecture on Shikoku Island, approximately 550 kilometers southwest of Tokyo. The village sits along National Route 439. From a thriving community of approximately 300 residents in the mid-20th century, Nagoro experienced steady decline as local jobs disappeared and the young people migrated to urban centers. By 2015, only 35 residents remained. By 2019, this number had fallen to 27, and current estimates suggest fewer than 30 people remain. Significantly, no children have been born in the village for over 2 decades. At the center of this entry is Tsukimi Ayano. She left Nagoro for secondary school, moving to Osaka with her parents, where she married, raised children, and spent her adult life as a housewife. Her return to Nagoro in 2002 to care for her aging father marked a pivotal moment not just in her life, but in the village's story. Confronted with the drastic depopulation of her childhood home, Ayano channeled her lifelong interest in doll making into what would become an internationally recognized art project. Attempting to grow vegetables in her garden, she created a scarecrow dressed in her father's clothing to deter birds from eating her seeds. When a neighbor mistook the figure for her actual father and greeted it warmly, Ayano realized that this was a basis for something more. From then on, she set out to fill the village with handmade dolls. Each figure requires approximately 3 days to complete. The creation begins with the face, which Ayano considers the most crucial element. She uses stretchy white jersey cloth wrapped around quilt batting, then employs careful stitching techniques to create individualized facial features. Buttons serve as eyes, while pinching and sewing of the fabric creates lips, wrinkles, and the distinctive character lines that give each doll its personality. She pays particular attention to the ears, carefully tucking and sewing the fabric to create realistic creases, explaining that she wants to ensure her creations, quote, can hear well. The body uses wire wrapped around rolled newspapers for the arms and legs, with additional newspapers stuffing the torso. Before dressing the dolls, she adds a waterproof layer to protect them from the elements. The clothing comes from donations sent by enthusiasts from across Japan, ranging from everyday work clothes to elaborate traditional kimonos. This collaborative aspect adds another layer of meaning to the project, as the dolls literally wear the contributed memories and materials of a broader community. Despite protective measures, the outdoor dolls face the inevitable effects of weather. Ayano has observed that the figures typically survive about 2 to 3 years before requiring repair or replacement. This cycle of creation, decay, and renewal actually adds a more visceral touch to the dolls, almost reflecting natural cycles of life and death. The dolls are positioned throughout the village in scenes that capture moments of everyday life. Some represent specific individuals who have died or moved away, created at the request of remaining villagers who wish to memorialize departed friends and family members. Ayano maintains a scarecrow registry, documenting each figure with a name and personal history, treating them as genuine community members rather than mere objects. Despite its remote location and difficult accessibility, the village attracts an estimated 3,000 visitors annually. The tourism generated by the dolls provides modest economic benefits to the broader region, though Nagoro itself lacks the infrastructure to capture much direct revenue. Visitors must travel through other communities, potentially supporting regional businesses, but the village itself offers no shops, restaurants, or accommodation facilities. Born on February 7, 1912 in Greene County, Virginia, Roy Sullivan was the fourth of 11 children in a family that lived in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Virginia typically experiences 35 to 45 thunderstorm days per year, significantly higher than many other regions. In 1936, Sullivan joined the National Park Service, though some sources indicate he started in 1940. He would dedicate 36 years of his life to park service, working as a fire patrol ranger responsible for monitoring a 40-mile area between Waynesboro and Swift Run Gap in the southern section of the park. Interestingly, Sullivan is marked as the man who has been struck the most times by lightning. Sullivan's first documented encounter with lightning occurred in April 1942 while he was stationed in a newly constructed fire lookout tower at Miller's Head. The tower lacked lightning rods, a critical safety oversight that would prove nearly fatal. At the time, the tower was struck 7 to 8 times, with fire jumping around all over the place. Recognizing the imminent danger, Sullivan fled the burning structure but was struck by lightning just a few feet from the tower. The bolt created a half-inch strip burn along his right leg, struck his toe, and left a hole in his shoe while causing him to lose the nail on his big toe. After 27 years of relative peace, lightning found Sullivan again in July 1969. While driving his parked truck along a mountain road, lightning struck nearby trees and deflected through his open truck window. The strike knocked Sullivan unconscious, burned off his eyebrows and eyelashes, destroyed his wristwatch, and set his hair on fire. The unconscious ranger's truck continued rolling until it stopped near a cliff edge. In July 1970, he was struck yet again while in his front yard. The bolt hit a nearby power transformer and then jumped to his left shoulder, searing it. The fourth strike occurred while Sullivan was working inside a ranger station in Shenandoah National Park. Lightning set his hair on fire, forcing him to smother the flames with his jacket. He rushed to the restroom but couldn't fit his head under the water tap, ultimately using wet towels to extinguish the fire. This incident marked a psychological turning point for Sullivan. Despite never being described as a fearful man, he began to believe that, quote, some force was trying to destroy him, and developed a fear of death. He started carrying a container of water in his vehicle for fire emergencies and would pull over during storms to lie down on his truck's front seat until they passed. On August 7, 1973, Sullivan experienced what he described as being hunted by lightning. While patrolling the park, he spotted a storm cloud forming and attempted to drive away, but the cloud seemed to be following him. When he finally believed he had outrun it and exited his truck, lightning struck him immediately. He claimed he actually saw the bolt that hit him. The lightning traveled down his left arm and left leg, knocked off his shoe, then crossed to his right leg below the knee. Remaining conscious, he crawled to his truck and used the water container he now carried to douse his burning hair. This strike reinforced his growing belief that storms actively sought him out. The sixth strike occurred on June 5, 1976, while Sullivan was surveying a campground. He reported seeing a cloud that he believed was following him and attempted to run away, but was struck anyway, injuring his ankle. his hair caught fire once again. His final documented lightning strike occurred on June 25, 1977, while he was fishing in a freshwater pool. The lightning struck the top of his head, set his hair on fire, and burned his chest and stomach. Oddly enough, he added that a bear came along shortly after and attempted to steal his fish. Despite his injuries and burning hair, Sullivan struck the bear with a tree branch. All 7 lightning strikes were officially documented by R. Taylor Hoskins, the superintendent of Shenandoah National Park. However, Hoskins was never present during any of the actual strikes and was not an active superintendent for many of the incidents. The verification came through medical documentation of Sullivan's injuries and damage to his clothing and equipment. The first 4 strikes were submitted to and verified by Guinness World Records, earning Sullivan the distinction of being the only living man to be struck by lightning 4 times in 1972. The final 3 strikes were documented by Sullivan himself, but never submitted for official Guinness verification, leading to some questions about their authenticity. However, the documented evidence includes hospital records and physical evidence of burns and equipment damage. The repeated lightning strikes gradually transformed Sullivan into a social pariah. People actively avoided him, fearing they might be struck by lightning in his presence. A restaurant on Loft Mountain reportedly wouldn't allow him inside during overcast weather. Robert Jacobson, superintendent of Shenandoah National Park from 1972 to 1986, confirmed that, quote, "A long-standing rule in the park was that if you see a dark cloud heading your way, get away from Roy Sullivan." To protect his family, Sullivan would isolate himself during storms, explaining, "When a storm blows up, I put my wife and 3 kids in the living room and go off by myself and sit in the kitchen, scared." His wife was also struck by lightning once while hanging laundry in their backyard, though Sullivan was helping her at the time and managed to escape unharmed. The mathematical probability of being struck by lightning 7 times has been calculated at approximately 1 in 2,187, followed by 21 zeros. However, these calculations assume independent probabilities, which don't apply to Sullivan's specific circumstances. Some researchers have speculated about potential explanations for Sullivan's repeated strikes. Theories include the possibility that once struck by lightning, a person's energy field changes, making them more susceptible to future strikes. Other hypotheses suggest Sullivan may have had a tendency to accumulate static charge, possibly through habits like dragging his feet while walking. Additionally, Sullivan's work in the elevated terrain of Shenandoah National Park, combined with his duty to remain outdoors during storms, created optimal conditions for lightning encounters. Then, on September 28, 1983, at age 71, Sullivan died from a single gunshot wound to the head. Police officially ruled it suicide, but the circumstances raise questions that persist to this day. Several factors contributed to suspicions about the official ruling. The death wasn't reported until 9 a.m., though investigators determined he had been shot at approximately 3 a.m. His wife was reportedly sleeping in the same room, but claimed the gunshot didn't wake her. Family members reported the couple was experiencing marital difficulties. Officer Randy Fisher found Sullivan, quote, bleeding from a single .22 bullet to the head, a contact wound through a pillow. Officer Philip Broadfoot of the local police defended the ruling, stating, "The family doesn't want it to be suicide. It's hard for people to accept. You've got to put a lot of faith and trust in folks responding to the scene." However, some family members and investigators questioned whether it was actually murder rather than suicide. The official reports cited unrequited love as the motive, though this explanation seems inconsistent with Sullivan's married status at the time of his death. In 1875, Dublin's Liberties District was the epicenter of Ireland's brewing and distilling industry. This area, known as the Golden Triangle, housed the world's largest concentration of whiskey distilleries. The neighborhood was home to famous names like Jameson, Powers, George Rowe, and Sons, and numerous smaller operations that collectively produced millions of gallons of whiskey annually. The Liberty sat high above the River Liffey, surrounding Christchurch Cathedral, and represented one of Dublin's oldest settled areas, dating back to the Viking era. By the 19th century, Irish whiskey had achieved global recognition as a premium product, with Dublin alone producing 10 million gallons annually and distributing it throughout the British Empire. However, on June 18, 1875, disaster struck. The exact cause of the fire remains unknown to this day, but the timeline of events is well documented. At 4:35 p.m., Lawrence Malone's bonded storehouse on Chambers Street was checked by an excise officer and found to be secure. The fire alarm was raised at 8 p.m., followed by emergency services being notified at 8:30. By 9:30 p.m., the wooden barrels within the storehouse began exploding from the intense heat, marking the beginning of the catastrophic spread of burning whiskey through Dublin streets. Malone's bonded warehouse was the largest of its kind in Dublin, built in a hollow square formation and what some sources identify as Ormond Street. The facility stored an enormous quantity of spirits, over 262,000 imperial gallons of whiskey, brandy, and wine, valued at over $7.5 million in today's value. Adjacent to Malone's warehouse was Reed's Malt House, which contained over 270,000 USD in products. When the wooden casks burst from the heat, they released their contents in what reports described as literal torrents from the doors and windows. The undiluted whiskey, being much more potent than retail bottled spirits, was extremely flammable. This created a burning river that flowed through Dublin's narrow streets with devastating effect. The blazing stream followed a specific path through the city's ancient streets. It started at the warehouse on Chambers Street, then flowed down Cork Street before turning onto Ardee Street. The fiery river caught buildings on Chambers Street as it passed, then continued its destructive course to Mill Street, where it demolished a row of small houses. At its peak, the burning whiskey measured 2 feet wide, 6 inches deep, and extended over 400 meters down one side of Mill Street. Captain James Robert Ingram was the first chief officer of the Dublin Fire Brigade, having been appointed in 1862 when Dublin established its municipal fire service. Born in Dublin in 1830, Ingram had emigrated to New York in 1851, where he worked first as a banknote engraver before joining the Niagara Hose Company in Lower Manhattan. Ingram was known for his unconventional strategies. In one famous incident, rather than attempting to extinguish a fire on a blazing ship in Dublin Bay, he ordered the Royal Navy to sink the vessel before it could reach port. When Ingram and his men arrived at the scene within 15 minutes of the alarm being raised, they faced an immense challenge. The fire brigade responded with 1 steam engine and 4 hand engines, accompanied by hundreds of police officers and soldiers. However, traditional firefighting methods proved useless against this ordeal. Water was immediately ruled out, as it would have caused the alcohol to float on top and spread the fire throughout the city, similar to how gasoline behaves on water. Ingram's first strategy involved ordering his men to rip up paving stones and spread a mixture of sand and gravel to create barriers. While this showed promise initially, the massive volume of whiskey simply seeped through the sand and continued flowing. Faced with the failure of conventional strategies, Ingram devised a peculiar plan: horse manure. Dublin streets in 1875 were filled with horse droppings, and manure was abundantly available in depots throughout the city. Ingram ordered soldiers to collect cartloads of wet horse manure and spread it across the streets to form substantial barriers. This proved highly effective at absorbing the burning whiskey. Additional materials were added to the mixture, including ash and tanning waste from nearby leather works in the Liberties. As accounts noted, this tactic added the smell of cooking manure to the already atrocious atmosphere. But as the burning whiskey met these dams, it was soaked up and the fire began to subside. As the fire raged, thousands of spectators gathered from across Dublin to witness the sight. The rapid evacuation of residents was aided by an unexpected early warning system, the squealing of terrified pigs from nearby livestock pens, which alerted people to the danger and contributed to what Lord Mayor Peter McSwiney later called a remarkably successful evacuation. However, many spectators saw the flowing whiskey as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for free alcohol. The Irish Times reported, "It is stated that caps, porringers, and other vessels were in great requisition to scoop up the liquor as it flowed from the burning premises. And disgusting as it may seem, some fellows were observed to take off their boots and use them as drinking cups." This was obviously not only disgusting, but also very dangerous. The whiskey was contaminated with horse waste, sewage, street debris, and other various materials that were used to extinguish the fire. But nevertheless, many chose to consume the alcohol. 24 people were hospitalized for alcohol poisoning distributed across multiple Dublin hospitals. 13 people ultimately died, all from alcohol poisoning rather than the fire itself. Among the documented victims were several notable cases. William Smith, a 21-year-old laborer, is one of the better documented cases. Smith had traveled with his neighbor John McGrain from Bow Street to witness the fire. McGrain later testified that Smith drank a great deal by scooping it up with his cupped hands. Smith fell unconscious at the scene, was carried home by strangers, and died 3 days later at Richmond Hospital in a state of, quote, profound coma. Some of those hospitalized recovered successfully. As one report noted, in the other cases, the patients were treated in the usual way and having recovered were discharged on Saturday morning, perhaps sadder and, it is to be hoped, wiser men. Contemporary newspapers described how what started out as panic had turned into a party. Among the most bizarre aspects of the disaster was what the Irish Times reported as a case of canine suicide. On Tuesday evening, a dog ran through the open door of William Eyre's house. The animal had consumed whiskey from the streets and was, quote, foaming at the mouth and evidently either rabid or suffering from delirium tremens. The dog behaved aggressively toward William and dashed madly about the house, knocking over furniture. When William defended himself with an iron bar, the animal ran upstairs and jumped from a top-floor window, ultimately falling to its death. As you'd expect, there was immense amounts of damage. Aside from the alcohol losses that were previously mentioned, total property damage reached over $9 million US. Hong Kong 97 has carved out a place in video game history as a notorious example of kusogi, a Japanese term meaning shitty game. Released unofficially in 1995 for the Super Famicom, this game stands out for its low quality, crude content, and the strange story behind its development. Over the years, Hong Kong 97 has gone from an obscure underground release to a celebrated cult classic, especially in internet gaming circles. The origins of the game are rooted in parody and satire. The game's creator, Yoshihisa Kurosawa, was an underground journalist and freelance writer who, under the pseudonym Happy Soft, set out to mock the gaming industry's predictable formula and the rigid standards imposed by publishers like Nintendo. Kurosawa never intended Hong Kong 97 to be a quality product. In fact, he wanted to lampoon the industry by creating something intentionally low effort, both in design and presentation. According to Kurosawa, the game was thrown together with help from an acquaintance over the course of just 2 days, though some accounts say a week was spent when including the planning stage. The game's rough edges are a direct result of this rushed, haphazard process. As an unlicensed title, Hong Kong 97 was never officially sanctioned by Nintendo. Distribution circumnavigated legal sales channels, relying instead on pirate devices like the Magicom, which allowed Super Famicom games to be copied onto floppy disks. Kurosawa's so-called company, Happy Soft, existed in name only, serving as a facade for the project. Promotion and sales took place in the back pages of obscure magazines, with Kurosawa sometimes using false identities to avoid legal issues. Reports estimate that between 30 and 100 physical copies were produced, but fewer than half were ever sold. As a result, original copies of the game are now incredibly rare and highly prized by collectors. Hong Kong 97 itself is a vertically scrolling shooter where players control Chin, a rough digital rendering that bears a striking resemblance to actor Jackie Chan. The action unfolds over a looping soundtrack, the Mandarin song I Love Beijing Tiananmen, while endless waves of red communist enemies swarm the streets of Hong Kong. The game's mechanics are extremely basic. One hit spells instant death, and there are no stages or progression, just an unending onslaught of enemies. Boss fights are basic and occasionally feature a huge, floating head meant to represent Deng Xiaoping, China's leader at the time. A key factor in Hong Kong 97's infamy is its rampant asset theft. Almost all the game's graphics were appropriated from outside sources. Backgrounds show grainy images of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and Chinese communist iconography, as well as unrelated elements like Western advertisements. But the most controversial piece of imagery in the game is the game over screen, which displays a real photograph of a dead body. For years, players speculated about the origins of this image. It was incorrectly believed to depict a murdered Polish boxer, but a 2019 investigation found that the photo came from the Japanese shockumentary titled New Death File 3 and actually shows a civilian killed in the Yugoslav wars. The game's opening crawl sets the tone for what's to come. Written in deliberately broken English and full of crude language, it introduces Chin's mission to wipe out the 1 billion communists in order to protect Hong Kong. The translation's poor quality is intentional, parodying the often shoddy localization practices of the time and the indifference of some publishers to non-Japanese markets. From the start, the game was underground and niche. Its launch in 1995 received almost no attention from mainstream gaming media. Awareness spread solely through word of mouth, pirate disc swaps, and mentions in fanzines. With the advent of easy emulation and increased interest in obscure retro titles during the 2000s, Hong Kong 97 re-emerged in online communities as an object of dark fascination. Its popularity surged after its feature in a 2015 episode of Angry Video Game Nerd, which introduced the game to a vast Western audience and solidified its reputation as one of the worst video games of all time. The mythology around the game grew in tandem with its cult following. For years, details of its creation were shrouded in mystery, leading to wild speculation about everything from who had made it to the provenance of its images and the number of real copies in existence. This curiosity led to extensive discussions on forums and detailed exposés, as well as frequent mentions in YouTube reviews and community retrospectives. Hitogata, which is literally translated to white people, has become one of the best documented yet ultimately unverified pieces of lost media in internet history. Emerging from a single post on the Japanese forum 2channel in 2004, the legend describes an unsettling television commercial or public service announcement that no researcher has managed to locate despite 2 decades of searching. As mentioned, the commercial originally surfaced on an online forum. An anonymous poster recalled a 15-second spot that showed 2 white, faceless human figures against a black background. A metallic con-con sound rang repeatedly, synchronized with a grim text or narration that said, "Every 2 seconds, a person dies on Earth." Each time the sound struck, one figure vanished, then reappeared as the other disappeared, the eerie exchange repeating until the commercial ended. A purported 1999 reference to the same commercial circulates online, but no archived copy of that thread exists, leaving the earlier citation highly disputed. Across hundreds of forum posts, emails, and interviews, witnesses generally agree on several core elements: a dark or monochrome backdrop, 2 featureless white figures, a rhythmic audio cue, and on-screen text about death. Yet their memories diverge on crucial details. Some viewers insist they saw railroad crossing lights or tracks, while others remember only a stark black void. A few listeners describe the audio as a hollow heartbeat rather than a metallic clang. Reported broadcasts range from the mid-1990s to 2003 and come from all over Japan, although clusters of recollections originate in Hokkaido, Osaka, and Fukuoka. These inconsistencies have complicated attempts to pinpoint a production year, broadcaster, or sponsor. The most widely accepted hypothesis frames Hitogata as a railway safety PSA. Proponents point to the chime that matches Japanese railroad crossing bells, the death toll messaging that would suit a transport safety context, and occasional witness claims of seeing crossing signals on screen. A second theory once assigned its origin to AC Japan, the country's main advertising council renowned for stark, socially minded campaigns. However, AC Japan has formally denied producing any spot that matches Hitogata's description. A third avenue of inquiry links the commercial to Tokuyama, a chemical firm whose 1993 commercials used white mannequins and minimalist backgrounds. Researchers discovered a 1994 Tokuyama regional commercial that resembles parts of the Hitogata testimony, yet the footage itself remains missing. Growing skepticism has spawned a fourth explanation. The mystery is a collective false memory, amplified by the Mandela effect phenomenon. Supporters of this view note that no physical evidence has surfaced despite exhaustive searches, and that Japan's 1990s airwaves were already filled with bleak PSAs easily conflated in hindsight. Volunteers have combed Japanese commercial yearbooks from 1996 to 2003, contacted broadcasters, railway operators, and ad agencies, and purchased hundreds of secondhand Betamax tapes in hopes of spotting the commercial in off-air recordings. They have also mapped witness locations to detect regional broadcast patterns, employed reverse image searches, and pooled findings through forums, Discord servers, and the Lost Media Wiki. The community's persistence eventually led 5-channel, 2-channel successor to prohibit general thread discussions of Hitogata to curb endless speculation. In 2024, attention shifted to a little-known production group called Island with Field, whose mid-1990s PSAs feature austere, high-contrast imagery and social messages that echo Hitogata's style. An alternative proposition suggests that childhood encounters with pedestrian signal icons and crossing alarms could have fused into a frightening memory over time, seeding the legend without any single originating broadcast. By 2025, opinion within the lost media community has tilted toward the mass delusion hypothesis. The absence of footage, despite years of organized searching, combined with the discovery of multiple near matches that could have inspired false recollections, has led many to conclude that Hitogata never existed as a standalone commercial. Nonetheless, a dedicated minority continues to pursue new leads, focusing on obscure regional advertisers, private tape hoards, and unindexed archival reels. The mystery of Fulcanelli is regarded as one of the most fascinating puzzles in 20th century occult history. This French alchemist, whose true identity has remained shrouded in secrecy for nearly a century, left behind 2 influential works that continue to captivate researchers, occultists, and academics worldwide. Fulcanelli emerged during a period of alchemical revival in early 20th century Paris. The turn of the century witnessed renewed scientific interest in the possibility of transmutation, sparked by discoveries in radioactivity by Henri Becquerel in 1896 and the isolation of radium by Pierre and Marie Curie in 1898. These breakthroughs suggested that the atomic structure of elements was not as immutable as previously believed, lending credence to ancient alchemical claims about the transmutation of metals. Intellectual communities at the time were particularly receptive to such studies. Prominent chemist Marcellin Berthelot had spent over 20 years studying original alchemical texts, publishing comprehensive works on medieval alchemy. Jean-Baptiste Dumas wrote that the possibility of transmutation cannot be considered an absurdity given the current level of scientific knowledge. This context created fertile ground for figures like Fulcanelli to emerge as bridges between ancient wisdom and modern scientific understanding. His first published work, The Mystery of the Cathedrals, appeared in 1926 in a limited edition of 300, a revolutionary interpretation of Gothic cathedral architecture as encoded alchemical texts. According to Fulcanelli, medieval builders embedded the secrets of the great work directly into the stone carvings, sculptures, and architectural elements of cathedrals like Notre Dame de Paris. The work is distinguished by its sophisticated approach to symbolic interpretation. Fulcanelli introduces the concept of phonetic Kabbalah, or the green language, a hermetic decoding method based on phonetic assonance rather than numerical calculations. This technique allows initiates to discover hidden meanings through wordplay, puns, and linguistic associations that reveal deeper alchemical truths. The second published work, The Dwellings of the Philosophers, appeared in 1930 in an edition of 500 copies. This text expands upon the themes of the first book, examining alchemical symbolism in various historical buildings and architectural ornaments. The work demonstrates Fulcanelli's extensive knowledge of both practical chemistry and hermetic philosophy. The third work, The End of the Glory of the World, was never published despite being prepared for release. According to Eugene Cancellier, Fulcanelli withdrew the manuscript himself, apparently recognizing the gravity of its revelations and humanity's unpreparedness for such knowledge. The title references a painting by Juan de Valdez Leal in Seville, depicting themes of death, judgment, and spiritual transformation. The proposed contents, based on surviving notes, included discussions of civilization's decline, cosmic causes of global upheavals, and cyclical theories of world ages. The most famous account of Fulcanelli's alleged prowess involves a transmutation demonstration in 1922 at the Gasworks Laboratory in Sarcelles. According to multiple witnesses, including Eugene Cancellier, Jean-Julien Champagne, and chemist Gaston Sauvage, Fulcanelli successfully transformed 100 grams of lead into gold using a small quantity of projection powder, or the Philosopher's Stone. This event has been consistently reported across multiple sources and remains one of the most credible accounts of alleged successful transmutation in modern times. The witnesses maintained their testimony throughout their lives, and no evidence suggests fabrication or delusion on their part. A second transmutation allegedly occurred in 1937 at the Chateau de l'Air, where Fulcanelli supposedly transformed 225 grams of lead into gold and 100 grams of silver into uranium before multiple witnesses, including scientists. However, some researchers have noted chronological inconsistencies regarding the identities of the alleged witnesses, raising questions about this particular account. Some researchers have suggested that Fulcanelli never existed as a single individual, proposing instead that the name represented a collective pseudonym for a group of collaborators. This theory gained traction due to the mysterious circumstances surrounding his disappearance and the lack of contemporary documentation about his personal life. However, the consistency of witness accounts and the sophisticated nature of the published works suggest a single, highly educated author with extensive knowledge of both scientific and hermetic traditions. The collaborative theory struggles to explain the unified voice and perspective evident throughout Fulcanelli's writings. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Fulcanelli mystery involves a reported meeting between the alchemist and chemical engineer Jacques Bergier in June 1937. According to Bergier's account, published decades later in The Morning of the Magicians, a mysterious stranger approached him with an urgent warning about nuclear energy. The stranger allegedly said the following: "You are on the verge of success, as are several others of our scientists today. Please allow me. Be very, very careful. I warn you, the liberation of nuclear power is easier than you think, and the radioactivity artificially produced can poison the atmosphere of our planet in a very short time, a few years." The significance of this warning, if genuine, cannot be overstated. This encounter occurred 8 years before the first atomic bomb test and demonstrated remarkable prescience about the dangers of nuclear technology. The warning included specific technical details about atomic forces and geometric arrangements of purified materials that wouldn't become public knowledge for years. The prophetic accuracy of these statements suggests either extraordinary scientific insight or access to classified research that wouldn't be available to most individuals in 1937. However, critics note that this account wasn't published until 1960, well after nuclear weapons had been developed and their dangers understood. Lake Retba is recognized as one of West Africa's most extraordinary natural phenomena. Located approximately 35 kilometers northeast of Dakar, Senegal's capital, this shallow lake has amazed scientists, tourists, and local communities for decades through its distinctive pink coloration and ecosystem. The lake occupies a position north of the Cape Verde Peninsula in northwest Africa, separated from the Atlantic Ocean by a narrow bit of sand dunes measuring approximately 1 kilometer in width. The lake covers an area of approximately 3 square kilometers with a maximum depth of 3 meters under normal conditions. The pink coloration is a result from a sophisticated biological mechanism involving a particular green algae that thrives in extreme hypersaline environments. This microorganism produces beta-carotene as a protective mechanism against intense sunlight and osmotic stress from the lake's extreme salinity. The same pigment responsible for giving carrots their orange color transforms the lake into its pink appearance. The intensity of the color varies dramatically based on environmental conditions, with the most vivid hues appearing during the dry season from June to November, when salt concentrations reach their peak and sunlight is strongest. During optimal conditions, salt concentrations can reach up to 40% in some areas, significantly exceeding the Dead Sea's 26% salinity. This extreme salinity creates buoyant conditions similar to the Dead Sea, allowing visitors to float effortlessly on the surface. Salt extraction from the lake also acts as one of Senegal's most significant industries, supporting thousands of workers from across West Africa. The extraction process begins with workers coating their bodies with shea butter to protect their skin from the corrosive effects of the hypersaline water. They wade chest deep into the lake for up to 7 hours daily, using long sticks to break up salt crusts that naturally form on the lake bed. The salt is collected in baskets and loaded onto flat-bottomed canoes. The harvested salt is then moved from boats to enormous drying mounds along the shoreline. Individual salt bags typically weigh approximately 55 pounds and sell for around $1, with workers capable of transporting up to 200 loads per day. The salt requires approximately 2 months to completely dry before being iodized.